5 people were executed in Washington. Wesley Allen Dodd, January 5, 1993. In 1989, 3 young boys were essayed and murdered in Vancouver, Washington by Wesley Allen Dodd. After an unsuccessful attempt to kidnap a 6-year-old boy at a movie theater, he was taken into custody later that year. In a diary that the police discovered, Dodd recorded in-depth details of the killings he committed. Upon entering a guilty plea to the murder charges, he was executed. On January 5, 1993, he was hanged, the first hanging in American judicial history since 1965, after declining an automatic appeal. Wesley Allen Dodd, the eldest of Jim and Carol Dodd's 3 children, was born on July 3, 1961, in Washington. Dodd asserted that he was never mistreated or abandoned as a youngster, but he insisted that he never heard the phrase "I love you" when he was growing up, and that he had no memory of ever saying it. Gregory, his younger brother, was placed under custody in 2016 for attempting to essay a 13-year-old girl. In a journal kept while incarcerated, Dodd detailed how his father had physically and emotionally abused him, how his younger siblings had frequently received more attention than he did, and how he had seen his parents get into violent arguments. Dodd had no friends because he was not accepted into any social circles at school. He realized he was attracted to other boys by the time he was 9 years old. After a fight with his wife, Dodd's father attempted suicide on July 3, 1976, his 15th birthday. In 1979, he earned his diploma from Richland High School. Dodd began to expose himself to kids in his neighborhood when he was 13 years old. At some point, his father acknowledged the behavior to an Oregon newspaper, but chose to overlook it because he believed his kid was generally a well-behaved child who never had problems with drugs, drinking, or smoking. By the time he started high school, Dodd had moved on to child molestation, starting with his younger cousins and then offering to watch kids from the neighborhood and the lady his father was seeing. Dodd was 15 when he was detained for indecent exposure, but the police recommended juvenile therapy before releasing him. At the age of 20, Dodd attempted to kidnap 2 females in August 1981. They denounced him to the authorities. Nothing was done. He joined the U.S. Navy the next month and was sent to the submarine base in Bangor, Washington, where he started torturing the base's resident kids. Dodd once offered some boys $50 to come play strip poker with him in a motel room. He got arrested this time. He told authorities he was going to molest the youngsters, yet despite this, he was sent off with no charges. Soon afterward, he was dishonorably discharged from the Navy after being detained once more for exposing himself to a child. Dodd was incarcerated for 19 days and had counseling mandated by the court. He was detained in May 1984 on suspicion of essaying a 10-year-old kid, but he got only a suspended sentence. Dodd, who called youngsters targets, planned his entire life to have easy access to them. He worked at fast food restaurants, as a charity truck driver, and in other jobs before moving into an apartment building with families with kids. He essayed a neighbor's preschool-aged children on multiple occasions, but the mother chose not to report him because she thought it would be too upsetting for the kids. When Dodd attempted to entice a young child into an abandoned building in 1987, the child notified the authorities. Given Dodd's past sexual misconduct, the prosecution suggested a 5-year sentence, but once more, Dodd got away with very little because he didn't really touch the youngster or shown any skin. He was put on probation and told to get mental health care. He left treatment after his probation ended and relocated to Vancouver, Washington, where he got a job as a shipping clerk. Dodd determined that Vancouver's David Douglas Park, a sizable, densely forested park with a number of isolated pathways, would be a good site to look for possible victims in the early fall of 1989. Over the next few years, he was arrested multiple times for child molestation. Each time, he received court-mandated therapy and served brief jail sentences. All of his victims, roughly 50 in total, were boys under the age of 12, and in some instances, the kids were around 2 years old. Dodd would later remark, "The more I thought about it, the more exciting the idea of murder sounded." Over time, his fantasies grew more violent. I had numerous plans for murdering a boy. According to a doctor who assessed Dodd after he was convicted, he met the legal definition of a sexual psychopath. Using a fish fillet knife and shoelaces, Dodd went to Vancouver's David Douglas Park on September 4, 1989, looking for young boys to kill. Cole and William Neer, two brothers, ages 10 and 11, were drawn to a remote location by the man who made them strip, chained them to a tree, and essayed them. When he was finished, he left the area after causing them several knife stab wounds. The boys were found at the park shortly after. William passed away on the way to a neighboring hospital, but Cole was already dead when he was discovered. Dodd began compiling a scrapbook with newspaper clippings and other information regarding the two brothers' death. He drove to Portland, Oregon on October 29, where he went to a nearby park and met 4-year-old Lee Isley and his 9-year-old sibling Justin. Dodd managed to talk the younger child into joining him as he was having fun alone on a slide. Dodd promised to drive Lee back to his house since Justin had left. After leading Lee to his Vancouver apartment, he gave the boy the instruction to strip. Lee was then restrained to the bed, and Dodd took pictures of the assault. He imprisoned Lee for the night and proceeded to assault him, recording everything in his journal. He photographed Lee's lifeless body as a trophy after strangling him to death with a rope the following morning and hanging it in the closet. Later, he would admit to the police that he had intended to spare the boy's life, but changed his mind because he needed to prevent him from informing anyone. Dodd threw Lee in some bushes close to Vancouver Lake after stuffing his bare body into trash bags. With the exception of the boy's underwear, which he preserved as a memento of the crime, he burnt Lee's clothes in a trash barrel. When Lee's body was found a day later, a manhunt was launched to find the murderer. Dodd maintained a low profile and stayed primarily in his flat, planning future kidnapping schemes and building a makeshift torture device for his next victim. On November 13, 1989, Dodd attempted to kidnap 6-year-old James Kirk from the New Liberty Theater's washroom by driving to Camas, Washington, which is located about 12 miles east of Vancouver. As Dodd was carrying the boy in his arms out of the theater through the lobby, the toddler started to wail and fight. Employees at the theater became suspicious and pursued Dodd outside on the street, even though Dodd was trying to calm the boy. He freed his victim as a result of their pursuit, got into his car, and left. William Ray Graves, the child's mother's boyfriend, was informed that the boy had almost been kidnapped when he arrived in the theater lobby. Graves left the theater and headed toward the area where Dodd was last seen. Dodd was trying to jumpstart his car when it broke down not too far from the theater. Graves claimed to be a passerby and offered to help Dodd so as to avoid arousing suspicion and buy some time. After placing Dodd in a headlock, he brought him back to the theater where staff members contacted the police. The Portland Police Task Force looking into Lee Isley's kidnapping and murder was called by the local police. Dodd was brought to the Camas Police Department where he was interviewed by lead investigators from the Portland Task Team, C.W. Jensen and Dave Trimble. After that, he was brought to the Vancouver, Washington, Clark County Jail, where Jensen and Trimble questioned him for 3 more days. Dodd eventually admitted to committing all 3 murders. After that, Jensen and Trimble executed a search warrant at Dodd's Vancouver residence. Police found a homemade torture rack, newspaper clippings about Dodd's crimes, a briefcase with Lee Isley's underwear, a photo album with pictures of Lee Isley, and various pictures of kids from store catalog and newspaper underwear ads when searching Dodd's house. They also found Dodd's diary, where he described the killings in great detail. Dodd was accused of trying to abduct a different child in addition to aggravated first-degree murder in connection with the deaths of the Neer boys and Lee Isley. He entered a guilty plea after first entering a not guilty plea to all charges. The prosecution showed pictures of Lee Isley and read aloud passages from Dodd's diary throughout his trial. The defense just asserted that Dodd had to be legally crazy without producing any supporting documentation or calling any witnesses. Dodd was found guilty by the jury, and they granted the prosecution's request for the death penalty. Dodd said that since the system had failed so many times, it was useless for him to defend himself. According to Washington state law, Dodd was allowed to choose lethal injection or hanging as his method of execution. He expressed his preference for the latter method, since it was how he killed Lee Iselli. The time between the killings and Dodd's execution was less than 4 years. He declined to challenge the death penalty or his case. This is what he said about his punishment. "I must be executed before I have an opportunity to escape or kill someone else. If I do escape, I promise you I will kill and essay again, and I will enjoy every minute of it." He wrote a brochure on how parents may shield their children from child molesters like himself during his trial. Dodd's hanging death was the country's first execution by hanging since Kansas executed George York and James Latham in 1965. 12 members of the local and regional press, along with prison officials and the relatives of the 3 victims, were present during the execution. For his final meal, Dodd requested fried potatoes and grilled salmon. The media witnesses captured his final words, which he said from the second story of the indoor gallows, as follows: "I was once asked by somebody, I don't remember who, if there was any way sex offenders could be stopped. I said no. I was wrong. I was wrong when I said there was no hope, no peace. There is hope, there is peace. I found both in the Lord Jesus Christ. Look to the Lord, and you will find peace." At Washington State Penitentiary in Walla Walla, Dodd was put to death on January 5, 1993, at 12:05 a.m. The jail doctor declared him dead, and his body was taken to Seattle so an autopsy could be performed. Donald Ray, the King County medical examiner, discovered that Dodd had passed away fast, in 2 to 3 minutes, but not from a broken neck as you would expect. In fact, this is rarely the case with executions by hanging. He also mentioned that Dodd probably didn't suffer all that much during the process. After the autopsy, Dodd was cremated and his ashes were given to his family. Charles Rodman Campbell, May 27, 1994. The state of Washington put Charles Rodman Campbell to death by hanging for a triple murder he had committed in Clearview in 1982. Later, DNA evidence connected him to another murder that occurred in 1975. Between 1971 and 1972, Campbell was housed at the Green Hill School in Washington. He was described as a young man who fell between the cracks and was thought to be occasionally exuberant yet elusive. Renee Wickland, 23, was attacked by Campbell in December 1974 while she was working in her yard outside of her Clearview, Washington home. At knife point, he forced her to have oral sex with him and threatened to kill her infant daughter Shanna if she refused. Wickland complied with his demands, and when he left, she called the police. It wasn't until 1976 that Campbell was captured, as she identified him during a police lineup. Since local law enforcement had known Campbell since he was a little child, they were not shocked. Wickland and her neighbor Barbara Hendrickson gave detailed testimony of the assault during the ensuing trial, and Campbell was found guilty of first-degree rape and given a 40-year jail sentence. Wickland was unaware that Campbell's punishments flowed simultaneously rather than sequentially. This implied that he would be eligible for parole after 7 years. In the end, Campbell's exemplary behavior led to his release in 1981. His discharge was not disclosed to his victims. In the years that followed, Wickland had gone through a divorce from her spouse Jack because of the aftermath of the attack and focused entirely on raising her daughter. She also helped students get loans for beautician school and supported herself and Shanna through her home-based accounting business. Jack Wickland was the victim of an odd incident in December 1977 when he was discovered in his West Seattle house, bound to a chair, suffering from severe third-degree burns. He said that a stranger came to his residence, bound him, doused him in gasoline, and lit him on fire. He was killed 5 months later when his car collided with a tree. It is unknown exactly how Jack Wickland died, and authorities were never able to conclude with any degree of certainty whether he killed himself or he was in fact murdered. Don, the husband of Barbara Hendrickson, discovered Renee, her 9-year-old daughter Shanna, and his wife, all of whom had their throats slit, when he went to Wickland's residence on April 14, 1982. The following week, Charles Campbell, who was living in a halfway home at the time, was taken into custody and charged with first-degree murder and second-degree larceny because, only hours before the crimes were discovered, he had tried to sell some of Renee Wickland's valuables. The crime scene was described as resembling a massacre by the police. Wickland's corpse was bare. She had been brutally beaten, strangled, and had her throat cut. Neither the murder weapon nor the object used to rape her were ever located. In addition, Wickland exhibited bruising on her knuckles that seemed to be from defensive wounds. After going over to the house to see how Wickland was doing, she had been sick with the flu that week, Barbara Hendrickson was attacked and had her throat cut. When Shanna got home from school, she experienced the same thing. She had suffered a severe cut to her throat, almost resulting in her decapitation. She had a set of earrings on that day, and the killer had taken them, so one of her earlobes was also ripped. Campbell made an attempt to assay another woman on the day of the killings. A neighbor girl reported to police that she had seen Campbell skulking around Wickland's yard that morning, brandishing a knife, and other neighbors had seen him walking toward the home while holding a big roll similar to a blanket. Additionally, it was clear that Campbell made a very careless and transparent escape from the crime scene. Renee Wickland's jewelry was found trailing down the walkway from the front door of the house, and a bloody handprint matching his fingerprints was discovered on a drinking glass in the Wicklands' kitchen. Shanna's earring was discovered on the back seat of Campbell's vehicle, and the driver's side door handle had dried blood on it. When Campbell was detained, Renee's earrings were discovered in his jeans pockets. Police were led by a fellow work-release resident to a spot he and Campbell had been on the evening of April 14 near the banks of the Snohomish River. Divers recovered more jewelry and trinkets that had been taken from the Wickland residence. On April 19, Campbell was taken into custody at the Monroe Reformatory and accused of first-degree murder. Being incarcerated in the Snohomish County Jail, he was disliked by his fellow inmates due to his child-murdering history and the fact that his crime meant that people on parole would be subject to more stringent regulations. In 2023, DNA evidence indicated that Campbell was most likely the culprit behind the unsolved April 1975 murder of University of Washington student Hallie Ann Seaman. Campbell declined to give a defense testimony or even to address the murders at his trial in November of 1982. Prosecution witnesses included his girlfriend, Judy Dirks, who stated that he had been at her house the morning of the deaths and had finished a six-pack of beer, as well as neighbors who had witnessed him prowling around the property on April 14 in the afternoon. Judy Dirks discovered one of her kitchen knives was gone the following day. During Campbell's work release, Dirks stated in court that Campbell had driven past Renee Wickland's house a few times and harbored considerable resentment towards her. It was discovered under cross-examination that Campbell tried to convince his girlfriend to say that he had never expressed his desire to hurt Renee Wickland. Other than arguing that the case was a miscarriage of justice and that investigators should have looked for the other possible suspects before focusing on Campbell, the defense did not call any witnesses or provide any supporting documentation. Many Clearview residents had signed a petition calling for his execution, and the jury decided that was a fair punishment, noting that he had shown no remorse at all for killing the Wicklands and Barbara Hendrickson. Campbell was largely disconnected throughout the trial. He was not visibly moved by the autopsy or crime scene images either. North Dakota-based Renee Wickland's mother and sister were especially horrified by the killings, since she had never disclosed to them that she had been assayed 8 years prior. This next info will shock you. Campbell's lawyers contended throughout the trial that he could not be prosecuted for assay because Renee Wickland's private area wound was a post-mortem injury that had not bled. So they were basically claiming that since the victim was probably dead, then the assay is not valid. According to coroner Dr. Clayton Haberman, she may have been alive when the assault occurred because brain death does not manifest until several minutes after circulation stops. Additionally, he mentioned that Shanna lost so much blood that getting a sample from her was challenging. Juror Dennis Britt instructed the jury to ignore the charges of assay. Yeah, I couldn't believe this either. Additionally, the prosecution's choice to show graphic autopsy images was objected to by the defense. This was allowed by Judge Britt, who added that the jurors were free to determine whether they wished to view the victim's clothes covered in blood. Campbell, the only witness to the killings, refused to talk about or describe what happened. Detectives had to piece together the events of April 14 in rough chronological order. It was clear that Renee Wickland had been attacked first. Before slicing Shanna's throat, it was thought that Campbell had shown the girl her mother's lifeless body in the bedroom next to her. By the time Barbara Hendrickson entered the house, they were most likely already dead. The living room's broken furniture suggested that she might have encountered Campbell and tried to run away, only to be apprehended. The bodies were all arranged in a way to intentionally shock whoever came across them. On December 17, 1984, the judge imposed the death sentence on Campbell. Campbell's attorneys filed 3 appeals in total, contesting his conviction over a 12-year period. Despite being against the death penalty, then-Governor Mike Lowry declined to commute Campbell's sentence to life in prison after learning of the specifics of his offenses. Campbell had his final shower 24 hours prior to his execution. 2 hours before the hanging, his last meal was served, and he declined to consume most of it. The victims' families requested to see the execution, but their request was denied. When authorities tried to take Campbell to a holding cell close to the execution room the day before his death, he refused to comply. He was discovered unconscious on his cell floor by the officer, who used pepper spray to finally incapacitate him. In his last hours, Campbell spoke with friends and family, including his son and former therapist. Campbell's hanging was the second in 2 years, following the execution of child killer Wesley Allen Dodd. I covered his case in part 1 of People Executed in Washington. Campbell would not stand on the execution platform. He had to be physically restrained to a board by corrections officers. Campbell shook his head continuously, making it impossible to put on the robe or the noose. Before the trap was activated, jail guards needed 90 seconds to secure the noose and throw a hood over his head. Campbell was declared dead after roughly 2 minutes. His cervical spine injury was the cause of his rapid death, according to an autopsy. Jeremy Vargas Sagastegui, October 13, 1998. Sagastegui was convicted of 3 counts of aggravated first-degree murder for the drowning and beating of Kivan Sarbacher, 3 years old, and the shooting deaths of his mother, Melissa Sarbacher, 21 years old, and the second woman, Lisa Vera Acevedo, 27 years old. 3-year-old Kivan Sarbacher was essayed, battered, stabbed, and drowned by Sagastegui in a home in Findlay, Washington, somewhere between the nighttime hours of November 18 and the early morning hours of November 19, 1995. Next, Sagastegui awaited the arrival of Melissa Sarbacher, Kivan's mother, at her house. As soon as she did, he shot her and Lisa Vera Acevedo, her companion. Subsequently, on November 19, 1995, a neighbor called Benton County Sheriff's Office, and deputies were sent to Sarbacher's home. There, they discovered Vera Acevedo's body lying outside the house. When the deputies entered the house, they found Sarbacher's body lying on the living room floor. They discovered 2-year-old Tiana Sarbacher standing in a cot in one of the bedrooms. She was not hurt. They also found 3-year-old Kivan's lifeless body laying on a bed in the master bedroom. The toddler felt cold to the touch and appeared slightly bluish in color. He was covered in a green terry cloth towel. Beside Kivan's body, the deputies noticed a sizable, bloody butcher knife. On the bed, they also discovered a jar of petroleum jelly. 3 little drips were found on Kivan's inner thigh when his body was later examined under a forensic light. Researching the material in the jar under the forensic light showed that it glowed similarly to the drops found on the child's corpse. The investigating deputies found toys and water in a bathtub in a bathroom close to the master bedroom. Additionally, bloodstains were discovered in the tub's side. The 3 victims' bodies underwent autopsies by forensic pathologist Dr. Terry Haddix. He discovered that Kivan had sustained an abdominal stab wound to the right side. He also noticed 3 cuts in Kivan's private parts, all of which had bled, and bruises surrounding the child's head. Haddix came to the conclusion that Kivan drowned. Kivan had foam in his upper airways and nose, as well as the appearance of his enlarged lungs. Haddix found that Vera Acevedo's death was due to a single chest gunshot wound. Sarbacher, however, had sustained 2 gunshot wounds. A bullet went through her neck and into her brain, while another entered through her chest. Though Hedges was unable to establish which wound happened first, both would have been lethal. On November 19, Benton County Sheriff's Office detectives conducted many interviews. During one interview, Corina Barnett, a friend of Sarbacher, informed the investigators that she had seen both Vera Acevedo and Sarbacher twice on the evening of November 18. At one point in the evening, Sarbacher informed Barnett that Sagastegui was watching her 2 kids. Vera Acevedo's cousin, Karen Saddam, told the police that she was aware they were searching for Sarbacher's Black Ranger truck. Saddam saw the Ranger vehicle in the apartment complex parking lot where Sagastegui lived the next day, November 20. She called the Benton County Sheriff's Office as soon as she noticed this. Sagastegui's roommate, Scott Peterson, informed sheriff's detectives the same day that Sagastegui had contacted him in the afternoon of November 18 to inquire about bringing Melissa's children over. According to Peterson, he turned down Sagastegui's request. He stated that Sagastegui might still be found in their flat and that he had never left the apartment since early on November 19. Detectives from Benton County quickly got a warrant to search Sagastegui's apartment. When the investigators showed up to carry out the warrant, Sagastegui was at his flat. When they approached him, they read him his Miranda rights, and Sagastegui said he would speak with the detectives and give up his rights. He continued by telling the detectives that something under the couch and a pair of keys were in his closet. The detectives searched under the couch in response to Sagastegui's statement, and under it they discovered a rifle with a brown leather strap. That gun belonged to Sarbacher's buddy Wes Boulware, who said he usually kept the weapon at the house where Sarbacher was killed. Additionally, the investigators took a pair of keys out of Sagastegui's closet and found that they would fit in the Black Ranger truck's ignition and door lock. I'm gonna read you some parts of Sagastegui's description of how the events unfolded. After stabbing Kevin, he put the child into the bathtub to make sure he was dead, and then wrapped Kevin in a towel so his guts wouldn't spill out all over the place, and threw him onto the bed. While waiting for Sarbacher to come home, he became angry because she knew he was nuts already, and she still asked him to babysit these kids. Sagastegui said that when Sarbacher entered the residence, he pointed the rifle at her. He described her reaction saying, "She's asking me what I'm doing with that and walks by like she's, like nothing." There was terror in that girl's eyes, but he thought the terror was more from her fear of what happened to her kids, and that you had to give her credit for that. Sagastegui said that after he shot Sarbacher, he got up out of his chair and asked her how it felt, and saw that she was already dead. He then went outside and asked Vera Acevedo the same question and saw that all she was doing was gurgling. He then told her to hurry up and die or something. Sagastegui was questioned by the detectives regarding the motivation for his crimes. In response, he called Sarbacher the worst mother in the world. He claimed that Kevin was going to grow up to be a molester, as he had been exhibiting symptoms of molestation, and in any case, he was a nasty child. Sagastegui informed the detectives that although the boy had no supervision, he didn't deserve to die, but most likely would have developed into a murderer in the future. Sagastegui continued by saying that Vera Acevedo's passing was an error. He said that he didn't know what he had done until he saw it on the news the day after the killings, maybe because you want to black out things that are bad. Sagastegui acknowledged that it was kind of a thrill to watch Sarbacher die, but that killing the baby was sick. Regarding essaying Kevin, Sagastegui said the following: "No, in fact I wasn't even aroused. I just started beating on the kid. I wanted to snap his neck and I kept twisting it and throwing him around. And I'm not even aroused. Then I figured maybe I was getting off to this, so I tried messing around with him and it wouldn't work. So eventually it did, but I don't think, I was out to molest the kid in the first place. I think, it was just, I don't even know what it was, but it was sick. I mean, it was a different feeling than what I got from the mother. But the mother, I actually smiled, and I think I almost got off on it." Sagastegui added that it felt good, and that he started thinking about going to Food Pavilion with the rifle and just start shooting people but that he was a little tired, so he just went to bed. The convicted triple murderer refused to fight his execution. His mother filed for a stay on his behalf, but it was denied as Sagastegui was found competent, and therefore no third party, including his mother, could file on his behalf. He was executed on October 13, 1998 by lethal injection. He was just 27 years old. Sagastegui, the first person to be executed in the state via lethal injection and just the third since the 1960s, passed away at the state penitentiary in Walla Walla at 12:43 in the morning. He had no final words. The lethal dosage of chemicals, thiopental sodium, potassium chloride, and pancuronium bromide mixed with saline was given to Sagastegui by a medical team concealed in a room behind a two-way mirror by pushing buttons. After giving the witnesses a quick glance, Sagastegui fixed his gaze on the ceiling. His breathing appeared to be in rapid spasms after a brief moment. He fluttered his eyelids. He was out of breath. No one from Sagastegui's family was present, despite his desire for his mother to attend. About 100 opponents of the death sentence prayed in silence outside the prison in a gated area located downhill from the facility. By the time Sagastegui passed away, about 50 supporters of the death penalty from a separate location 50 feet away had already left the prison premises. The victims' family members left the execution quietly, comforting each other. James Homer Elledge, August 28, 2001. Elledge was executed by lethal injection in Washington State Penitentiary for the murder of 47-year-old Eloise Jane Fitzner while on parole for another murder. Elledge committed robbery in 1964 in an Albuquerque, New Mexico Western Union office. He also abducted a female attendant during this heist. After serving a jail term in Santa Fe, New Mexico, and being granted release, he relocated to Seattle, Washington, where he killed hotel manager Bertha Lush in 1974 after a fight over a bill by striking her to death with a ball-peen hammer. He was granted 3 paroles throughout his term in jail for that offense. The most recent one took place in August of 1995. On April 18, 1998, Elledge, who was employed as a custodian at a church, invited Eloise Fitzner and her friend, who was only known as SC, into a Bible study room. He shut the door behind him, then took out a knife and bound the ankles and wrists of the 2 women. He turned SC towards the wall and covered her head with a sweater. SC heard someone struggle behind her and looked to see what was going on. Noticing this, Elledge turned her again to face the wall and threatened her that she would be next to be killed if she did not stay facing it. Elledge fatally stabbed Fitzner in the neck after first strangling her with his hands because he wasn't sure if she was dead. He hid the body, then kidnapped SC and took them home in Fitzner's vehicle. He molested SC in his house and then let her go the next day. She went straight to the police. 2 days later, Elledge was apprehended and made a confession. He entered a guilty plea to aggravated first-degree murder on May 27, 1998. He refused to allow his attorney to raise any defense during the penalty phase. In his own testimony, he stated, "There is a very wicked part of me, and this wicked part of me needs to die." Elledge was sentenced to death on July 28, 1998. On August 28, 2001, in Washington State Penitentiary, he gave up all of his rights to an appeal and was put to death by lethal injection. He was only the 4th person to be put to death in Washington State since the capital penalty was reinstated there in 1981. Elledge asked for a last meal of waffles, eggs, bacon, cereal, sweet rolls, and orange juice, but he refused to eat it. The last thing he actually ate was a breakfast consisting of eggs, toast, hash browns, apple juice, and coffee. He didn't have any final words. Cal Coburn Brown, September 10, 2010. Holly Washa, 21, was abducted by Brown in a hotel parking lot when he was on parole for a violent sexual offense. Brown threatened to kill her with a knife and forced her to drive or die. Later, he made her sit in the passenger seat against her will, tied her hands behind her back, and drove her to his neighboring motel. Holly was made to undress in his motel room. He then bound her to the bed and repeatedly essayed and tormented her for several hours. After stabbing Holly multiple times and stuffing her in the trunk of her car, Brown eventually abandoned the car in a parking lot and left the woman to bleed to death. Holly's body was discovered in her car's trunk a few days later. Following Holly's murder, Brown took off for Palm Springs, California, where he met up in a different hotel room with his next victim. This woman had her throat cut and was handcuffed by him, but somehow she lived to inform the authorities when Brown left the room. She survived. After being apprehended in the hotel parking lot, Brown immediately provided audio-taped confessions to the essay and attempted murder of this woman named Susan in California, as well as the murder of Holly Washa in Washington. In a long statement, Brown acknowledged that he understood Washa's family's animosity towards him, but he did not offer an apology. He said he hoped the execution would bring them closure and that he had forgiven their hatred. He added that he had no complaints regarding his treatment there and that the prison staff had been quite professional. Brown, however, objected to the unequal sentencing, claiming that murderers who had killed a lot more people, like Gary Ridgway, the Green River Killer, received life sentences. He said, "I only killed one victim. I cannot really see that there is true justice. Hopefully, sometime in the future, that gets straightened out." Brown's final words were, "Thank you, God bless you, God bless my family." Dan Satterberg, the prosecutor for King County, as well as Holly Washa's brother, sister, and father, were present for the execution. Following his remarks, Brown, who was tied to a gurney and laying on his back, glanced up at the tubes that protruded from the wall and were attached to his body. His lips quivered and his chest heaved 3 times before becoming motionless after the medicine was given. Brown spoke over the phone with his family and attorney, but they were not present during the execution. The state Supreme Court, the U.S. Supreme Court, and the 9th U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals all denied requests to halt the execution. Governor Chris Gregoire turned down his request for clemency. Brown had been incarcerated on death row for 16 years, and this was Washington's first execution since 2001. Brown had maintained that his mental illness should have prevented his execution and that it was not given enough consideration at his sentencing. Court documents indicated that he had bipolar disorder. Witnesses said Brown died about a minute and a half after the drugs were administered. He was pronounced dead by prison officials at 12:56 a.m. Up until October 11, 2018, when a state Supreme Court decision ruled the state's capital punishment statute to be void and out of application, Washington continued to apply the death penalty. The capital sentence was declared illegal by the court because of racial bias, but this ruling did not invalidate the death penalty as a whole. Rather, it mandated that the statute be changed to remove any racial bias. The state executed 78 individuals between 1904 and 2010. Cal Coburn Brown was the final person to be executed there. Governor Jay Inslee officially abolished the death penalty in Washington state and withdrew the death penalty's components from state law in April of 2023. The jury's decision had to be unanimous when the prosecution requested the death penalty. Even if one juror voted against the death penalty, a life sentence would be imposed in the event of a hung jury at the sentencing portion of the trial. Retrials were not allowed. Regarding death sentences, only the governor possessed the authority to grant clemency. The method of death that the prisoners wanted, a hanging or a lethal injection, was up for selection. The default technique was lethal injection if the prisoner did not make a decision. The last state with a working gallows was Washington. Delaware took theirs apart in 2003. Because of his potential for decapitation as a result of his obesity, Mitchell Roop sought to have his execution reversed on the grounds that it was cruel and unusual. The court decided that there was not enough scientific evidence to support hanging didn't pose the risk of beheading, so Roop's sentence was commuted to life in prison. A total of 110 executions have been carried out in the state and its predecessor territories since 1849. Please hit that subscribe button if you like my channel. See you next time. Bye bye.